Your sound is good? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the TOC election live talk show with me, PJ Thum. And tonight we're going to wrap up and round up 8 days, 8 furious, intensive days of campaigning. And by popular demand, back here with me, Jeannette Chong, who is a former candidate, candidate, ran in Mountbatten SMC twice, now volunteer with the Workers' Party of this election, lawyer, and Sean Francis Han, who is editor-in-chief of Wake Up SG. Cool. Welcome back, guys. It turns out that the first the first discussion that we had was really popular, and both of you got a lot of praise online. Right?
Nice.
Yeah. So here we are back again. Right. So it feels like it's only been 8 days, but this election, it feels like it's been a roller coaster. It's dragged on forever. I'm exhausted. I don't know how you two feel. How do you feel, Jeannette?
Well, I'm okay. I mean, it's like Christmas comes once in 5 years. After that, all the calm down and it's life as per normal. Yeah.
But you've been walking the ground. So what is the mood on the ground that you feel?
I think it's pretty hard to gauge because when we walk, we're walking in a small group. We won't be able to walk in a big group or whatever. And so I think it's very hard to predict, I would say. Yeah.
But in terms of how people feel about this election, right, do you get a sense like people are eager for this vote, or are they, for example, really worried more about COVID-19, or, how do people feel about the election itself rather than the outcome? Any sense?
I think that people are concerned that we are holding an elections in the middle of a pandemic. There are people who are still not comfortable to go outdoors or to meet or greet people, and people are very much observing social distancing. So it's really odd to having, it's a big constraint to campaign at this time. And even though people may want to meet the candidates or want to meet, but it's also like there is this other limiting factor. So it's a really odd way to campaign, yeah.
So how about you, Sean? You are our online guru, right? You've got a massive, or at least Wake Up SG has a massive following online. What's the sentiment there? Especially, I guess, if we assume that online means you're younger, how do people feel online about this election?
So I think that there's a lot of very interesting thoughts that are coming out about this election. I'm very glad to see all of that coming out now. I think the youth, the younger voters, the first-time voters, are just being a lot more vocal right now, right? There is a sense of hope. I think that there is a sense where the connection between global politics, which they're a lot better schooled in, is being connected to local political issues. So I'm very glad to see that. There is a sense of hopelessness, of regret, of sadness and disappointment at the way that things have been done as well. And I think that that's natural. It's hard to keep that fight up constantly. But yes, the ideas, the anger, the really insightful ideas that are being pushed now are revolutionary, in my opinion.
Revolutionary?
Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. So give me an example. What do you mean?
I mean, the fact that we could have Racer come out and say, I've read every Angela Davis text. That's something that's new. That's such a breath of fresh air. Suddenly critical race theory is being brought into the forefront. These ideas are no longer hiding, under the dark history of this and that conspiracy. They're coming out now, right? These ideas are being discussed. People are making that connection between structural and systemic racism in the Black Lives Matter movement into Singapore, right? Looking at how economics crushes minorities, looking at how culture and history come to the forefront to really decimate entire communities. So that connection here is being made, right? It's not an easy connection because America is so unique in its own sense, right? But to make that powerful connection, right, and to adjust it to Singapore's intricacies and nuances is something that I'm just very, very happy to see from all the followers, from everybody that's in the Twitter sphere, in the Instagram sphere, in the Facebook sphere as well. So yes, I am hopeful.
You know, I mean, as a historian, actually, of course, I'm very excited to hear you say this because if you have a longer perspective of Singapore's history, this is not new. A lot of our politics in the 50s and 60s was shaped by a lot of prevailing thought about socialism, imperialism, anti-colonialism, and ideas like Kwame Nkrumah's, articulation of neo-colonialism, Frantz Fanon, right, and his ideas, but also broader discussions of nationalism, of how do we organize our lives, our communities, our societies, to overcome many of these ideas of identity, outdated back then. It was seen as outdated, outmoded ideas of identity to build new modern societies. Was very prevalent in Singapore from the 20s all the way to the 60s and 70s even, but then very much frozen both locally by the clampdown on politics, but also internationally by the the end of the Cold War, the rise of the liberal, democratic, and then the neoliberal consensus, the declaration by Fukuyama of the end of history, right? And now we're seeing what a friend of mine has called the end of history, because suddenly this consensus that there is only one way to do things, the Western liberal democracy way to do politics, and one way to do your economies, capitalism, these things are breaking down, and suddenly people are actually actively interrogating these things again in ways that they haven't since the 80s or in early 90s. So this is also actually part of a broader global trend where a lot of very interesting thought has been suppressed or under this consensus. And so Singapore itself, the fact that this is arising is also, I think, part of that. And I'm so excited to hear it.
I'm excited to see where it goes as well. There are tons of amazing movements. There are Southeast Asian writers that are being sold at the moon now. These ideas, these powerful ideas are coming out of the woodworks. They're coming out of the universities. And the youth are championing them. They are articulate. They are brilliant. They're insightful. So yes, I'm really interested to see where this goes. Yeah.
I only hope that we don't get a huge amount of disappointment after polling day and then everyone kind of loses interest again, because that tends to happen, unfortunately. Okay, so Jeannette, let's talk about the past 8 days. Mm-hmm. And since you seem so fresh, why don't you start? Because I am tired. I am really, really tired. I mean, I've said my piece before about how I feel about this election, but what are your big takeaways from the past 8 days?
Yeah, I think there are quite interesting takeaways. For one thing, you can see that Dr. Thum Pingtjin has become hype beast. I mean, I've watched his videos, the little snippets on Instagram, and they are very engaging. And I think that he's got a new following among the young people, and I think that is a very interesting. I mean, I think he's very captivating in the videos. And the other thing that, of course, we should really take note of is that the fact that the PM's son, brother, Lee Hsien Yang, has actually joined an opposition party and campaigning side by side with Dr. Thum Pingtjin and his party, which is and also, the PSP. So I think this is like like a glitch in the matrix kind of thing, and it's like a plot twist in something that I think it's very different happening. So there are also other personalities, other political candidates that have impressed me and have emerged to the forefront. And I think I would say, just to summarize, Pritam Singh, for his very exemplary leadership, the way he conducted the doorstop interview, and it was something that was showed that he could really manage the situation in a way, and that what he has shown can be the team spirit, not standing by your people and everything. That is something that even you can follow in other situations. And of course, Jamus being an example of the kind of caliber of opposition candidates that are coming up. No more can you say that, opposition got no talent or whatever. I mean, no. Okay, so you can see that he's an example of all the talent that is available. And Dr. Paul Tambaya, showing that he has the stature and the gravitas and the caliber, to really examine and the issue of the day, which is the pandemic and how our government has been handling it. So I think that these are people that really impressed me this round.
The thing is that one of the stories I heard about Pritam is basically, I think that the press started asking him, this is like the first day, all the questions about the manifesto, and so he just started handing out copies of the manifesto saying, you guys read it and then come back and ask me questions tomorrow. Now, if this is true, that meant that they all have copies and they're supposed to have read it, but then a few days later, Lee Hsien Loong says, the opposition parties have nothing in their manifestos about COVID-19, and the press just runs that, right, having had copies from Pritam of the manifesto, and they should know that it's not true, but they just run that. And then the next day they ask Pritam, and his response is, it's page 1 of the manifesto. Right? So this election, right, you mentioned many of these people, it's also been defined by the independent, the mainstream medias. They've been really exposed in their bias, right? We know they're biased, they've even admitted they're biased, but their bias now makes them look absolutely inept, where they can't even, they simply run things which are so blatantly untrue. And all in pursuit of putting down some of the people you've mentioned and others, and the attacks on Paul, of course, being another one, right? And so I think this election has also really exposed both that the mainstream media is out there to shield for the government, for the PAP specifically, but also that they're extremely inept, or maybe they're not inept, but they're not permitted to do their job. What's the mood online? What do you think, Sean, the past 8 days?
So, I mean, when I was thinking about, okay, how did I feel about this whole election, right? This long 8-day process, and trying to put my thoughts together. I sat down with some friends and we kind of went through, okay, what were the things that happened, right? And what stood out to me is that I think really this is an election that's going to be defined by how much free speech was demolished. The attacks that have been leveraged on Risha, the attacks that were leveraged on Ji Sun Juan by Vivian Balakrishnan, right? The Alfian Saad saga, the police reports flying around, the POFMAs flying around, right? Even not too long ago, in recent memory, the Pretty Please saga, right? So it seems like almost this is a natural thing. There is, I think, a tendency when you're on social media and the news is flying so fast, right, to kind of forget or to not connect the dots, right? But if you take a sort of step back, you notice that it's gotten increasingly tight. Free speech is being increasingly curtailed here. Threats, veiled threats, thinly veiled threats are coming out left, right, and center. And that's the horrifying part. So as much as I'm filled with a great amount of hope, the new ideas, the fresh perspectives are not going to mean anything if when they are placed out, a POFMA or a police report or a police investigation is levied on the individual. So that's my sentiment, I think, connecting those dots right now. Yeah.
Do people increasingly get their news, do they still get their news from traditional news sources, or do you feel that people are getting their news more from online alternative sources, especially people who are more connected?
I think that there is a trend, not just in Singapore, but globally, for individuals to get their news increasingly from social media, get them online. And of course, this has its upshots and it has its downshots, right? It's got its pros and cons. There is that increase. It gives a bigger global perspective. But sometimes it does also, when you do a sort of compare and contrast, the robust nature of the debates in many other countries or in many other discourses really becomes a lot more attractive when you compare it against the Singapore narrative, where it's one party, one apparatus that's pushing the narrative, that has basically all of the talk space to itself, and where you know that it's biased, you know that it's framed and primed in a certain way. Naturally, consciously or subconsciously, even I myself find myself gravitating towards more international matters, because the debate is so much more robust. There are ideas there which are wonderful. And you look at the sorry state of Singapore media, it's not stimulating, it's not interesting, it's not even fair, right? So I can totally, it's got its pros and cons. It gives us a bigger picture, but at the same time, it really makes us look so terrible in comparison that we just lose a good ton of interest in keeping up with local politics. Yeah.
Interesting your remark on free speech, though, because, you know, again, of course, I'm a bit older than you, and I feel like we do have more freedom to express ourselves now because of all these alternative channels. And growing up in the 80s and 90s, I really don't remember getting anything other than the official, you know, PAP/government perspective on issues. And so alternative perspectives would never even have made it to the light of day. To 30, yeah, I mean, what do you think, Jeannette? You're a bit older than I am, so you have more perspective here.
Okay, so I think that this round, I hear a lot of young people, you know, lamenting, say, oh, what's all this, you know, controversies about, you know, Pomata and POFMA and everything. But, you know, there was a time, I think 2011 GE was probably the first time that no politician was sued. You know, because in the past, right, you have got lawsuits regularly being filed against opposition politicians for what they said during campaigning, and opposition politicians being made bankrupt for this and for that regularly in the past history. So, you know, until such a time that to be even standing up for elections was like, oh, you know, you're going to be like, you know, you might be sued or whatever it is. But things were pretty rough too in the past, right? And so now to me it's like, oh, it's just a police report, or, you know, it's just, but compared to what, you know, you're going to bankrupt and, you know, sue in court kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Which is why I think that what's happening this election is scary. The avenues, like for Raisha, it was a tweet, right? The POFMA attacks have been on alternative news sites, they've been on Facebook posts, right? What is frightening to me is that the machinery is learning to counteract this new global wave of freedom, the global wave of alternative perspectives, and doing so, I think, quite cunningly, quite cleverly, in fact. It's kept up, right? It's not been in its ivory tower, stale and dusty. No, it's come down and learned what's happening and adapted its machinery. And of course, it's not going to be adaptable in as powerful of a way. We're going to have a lot more wiggle room, and that's where the hope for me comes from. I think the internet's such a big place. There's a lot more wiggle room that we have. But what is frightening is how quickly they adapted. Yeah.
I think it's also good that you see people, our standards have changed. The kind of things that, the fact that, well, you know, I'm trying to find a silver lining, but the fact that we're disappointed in this election shows that actually our standards have risen, because the things that have happened in this election would have been very normal in the 80s or 90s, where candidates, opposition candidates, you know, quite infamously, Lee Kuan Yew revealed Cham Si-tong's O-level results and said, you know, he only got what, five O-levels or whatever, in not even all A's, whereas Ma Bao-tan is all, you know, whatever, all A's, and things like that. Tan Liang Hong, you know, was hounded out of Singapore. JBJ was sued for making a factual statement, right? A factual statement. So hopefully the fact that we feel disappointed by this election means that things, not just our standards are changing, but that politicians, and especially politicians in power, as the younger, newer generations of people come in, right? That their standards also shift, and things that their predecessors, that the 2G or 3Gs, dirty politics that generation would indulge in, wouldn't be done by the 4G or even the 5G, who are probably the new people coming in, one can hope.
So PJ, I want to say that I hope and I really appeal to the younger voters to demand a level of discourse that is worthy of their education and their intellect. And the future belongs to the young people, and if they want Singaporean politics to have that kind of like what they call it, level, then they should demand it. And not be sort of, just doesn't matter kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, something that has to be fought for every day, not just, during the election, but every day. By the time we get to election, it's too late to ask for many of these things. So let's talk about some of the big issues which you feel have dominated. And I've spoken about one, which is, we've kind of spoken about the lack of fair media coverage, the lack of free speech. Another big issue which has kind of dominated is the issue of race, and of course you mentioned Raisha Khan. Mm-hmm. What, from your perspective, especially since you're a minority, how do you think this issue is going to affect the election?
I really hope that it's a point that will resonate with a lot of not only minorities, but voters, first-time voters, anyone who has a friend who's a minority, who wants to listen to the experiences of minorities, who can relate and empathize with the experiences of minorities. I find, and this is my personal opinion, but I find what Raisha put out, the idea that Raisha put out, is really the big step here. Okay, we can say racism is bad, finally, right? Everybody can say racism is bad. The next step is to address structural inequality, structural systemic historical racism, and that's what Raisha put on the table. Now, it was very quickly shut down because I think it hit this soft spot that a lot of Singaporeans have, right? But and this is not an original point, I got this from one of the people on Wake Up Singapore who's messaged us. I think the point is to reframe Raisha's ideas. Not to say that the courts are corrupt, that they are disgusting, that they are evil in some way or racist, but they are made of human beings, fallible, mortal, flesh and blood human beings, as is the police, as is any group of people or any institution that is made up of human beings, right? Those people can have biases. They can have, on a subconscious, subliminal level, biases and prejudices that they are not aware of, that need to be pointed out. And if you reframe it that way, right, what Raisha is saying is not open hostility, it's not wanton disregard for the sanctity of our institutions. It is a call for us to improve our institutions by improving the people who are in those institutions. Yeah. So it's a massive point. I wish people are going to pay attention to it. I wish that the attention paid to Raisha's statement is going to resound in the votes. So yes, that is my take on it.
You mentioned something really interesting there, and that's the word structural, right? And I think for me, structural and structural change in some way sums up this election, because we keep hearing so many things that are to do with the manifestations of massive structural problems. And this is where the PAP wants to keep the level of conversation, because they are responsible for the structure and they can't really effect major change to a structure that they themselves have set up and defend and are comfortable in and works to their advantage. So they want to talk about managing the symptoms of many of these problems. But what I am also partly disappointed by, but also I have to wonder whether it's the lack of time and exposure for opposition candidates, is that there isn't enough discussion about many of these structural issues. So you touch on one huge one there, which is race, right? And we have a system in Singapore which is extremely discriminatory, and which actually is one of the few areas in which we can absolutely say it is, because that's how Lee Kuan Yew set it up to be. He was not shy about this, right? But there are other important structures that need to be addressed, and for example, the economy. And so what I've had conversation after conversation around this table about the role of migrant workers, of foreign talent in our economy, about the number of jobs that are going to foreigners, about the treatment of Singaporeans. And I keep saying, well, but this is a structural issue with regards to the exploitation of labor by capital. And this is not an issue that's unique to Singapore. But you know, we are responsible here for Singaporeans and Singaporean workers, and we need to think about how actually capital exploits all workers and deal with that. But again, then the discussion seems to be very much about, well, let's have fewer foreigners. Let's have, you know, foreigners are taking Singaporeans' jobs, rather than, hey, capital is exploiting all of us, and they're bringing in foreigners to then suppress Singaporeans' wages. It's the foreigners are not the problem. It is capital. It is the establishment. It is the government. So, you know, there's just not enough. I think James is the only person I think whom I've heard talk about capital and labor's share of the income, you know, GDP, which is very low, right? And these ideas seem to have been lost in other parties' discussions. But then you sit down here, I sit down here and I talk to Lim Tian, I talk to Paul, I talk to, you know, the people of the PSP, and some of them have a lot more substance than others, not who you'd actually expect, you know, and they have very interesting proposals. And I have to wonder, again, coming back to the other issue, why do I have these misconceptions about their platforms being, say, you know, xenophobic? Is it because they are, or because I keep hearing the media, the mainstream media say that, and subconsciously I absorb that? Is that my fault too? So yeah, so I'm like, there's just so many things going on here. The massive structural changes are needed. We're talking about issues of race, about the workers, about the economy, problems with the media, and all of this adds up into. This is why I'm so disappointed with this election, because we came into this wanting to have a serious discussion of important issues, and instead it's all this very superficial. Even when you discuss an issue, it becomes very superficial because there's just no time. In other countries, they have months for their elections, and so it doesn't feel like a rush. You can take days off, you can take the weekend off, right? You can spend some time researching an issue and come back to it. You can walk away, come back, sit down, think. And you have free media, you have experts talking on all these different channels about these important issues. We have none of that. I have interviewed live more opposition candidates than the entire mainstream media. Me, one person, you know, what is...
Yeah, that is a good observation, yeah.
Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but so I picked on a few things there. Feel free to respond on any of them.
I think also because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and people's minds may be focused on how am I going to survive these few months, you know, we've been locked down and everything. And I think that bigger issues seem to be like, you know, overshadowed by the immediate, you know, things that we have to cope with. And that's why it's so unfortunate that we were having these elections where important issues that are like policy or the structural, you know, changes that we can examine or evaluate for the next 5 years as to how our country will be going forward is now being kind of like, you know, taking second fiddle to the fact that, oh, jobs, you know, I mean, like how can I survive this year kind of thing, you know. So it's unfortunate. And the other thing is that, you know, I think all the more we should really support independent media, because that is the way that we can have, you know, a source of you know, resources to think through on important issues. Otherwise, we have no material on which to decide or to weigh, you know, what the ruling party is serving us with.
I think sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I'm good, yeah.
Oh no, I'm just going to say, I think you're right. The pandemic has affected things, but actually I want to bring up an interesting graphic. Terry, can you bring up the graphic? Which is actually New Narratives Citizens Agenda Survey, which we launched a year ago, right, July 2019. And this survey was carried out throughout August, September, October 2019. And it identified, basically it surveyed a group of Singaporeans and identified and asked them to rank the top 5 issues facing Singapore. Now, New Narrative never said, okay, this is going to be a statistically significant survey. We don't have the money for that, right? We're also independent media, no money, no resources. So we just did a survey where we asked people, tell us what the most important issues are. Then we categorize them into 28 issues. And then we ask you again, okay, tell us, pick the top 5. Now, if you look behind me here on the top 5, you guys can see it on the screen. Those actually, I feel, have been the top 5 of this election. Number 1, transparency and accountability. Every single opposition party has brought up transparency and accountability. Vote us in the government to be a check and balance on the PAP. Vote us in the government so we can ask questions of the PAP. That's always, every candidate I've spoken to has said the same 2 things, that what can we actually do knowing the PAP is going to win? 2 things. We'll ask them questions, we'll hold them accountable, right? Number 2, destructive politics. Again, POFMA, right? All these ridiculous police reports. And the PAP itself scoring all these own goals. Well, I don't know if they're own goals in the sense of they're going to lose any votes. I have no idea. But they're just behaving so ridiculously and childishly with press releases, right? Saying incredibly childish things. And the kind of things that the politicians, the PAP politicians have said and done before and during this election period. That's number 2. Number 3 and number 4, inequality, cost of living, poverty. That's what this whole thing is about, because the PAP will talk about jobs, jobs, jobs. What the opposition have talked about is not just jobs, but jobs which pay meaningful living wages, fair wages. And the PAP to a certain extent has conceded that by talking about, they've trotted out Thum and again talk about the progressive wage model, about reducing inequality, about fairness. So even the PAP have conceded that. And number 5, discrimination. I mean, we don't even need to, that's been so clear. Racial discrimination in Singapore is bad, and it's as bad as ever. Whereas some of the issues which you think this election would be really about, and in particular, the pandemic, right? And the climate crisis, we had climate crisis at number 6, but the climate crisis has been barely an afterthought in this election, and the pandemic has only been in the conversation when it's a source of controversy around Paul Tambia. So in some ways, I feel that we actually managed to capture this quite accurately, but it also shows a certain consistency, because the things that our viewers were saying were important in October or September last year are also important now. So people are focused on the same issues. They're talking about the same big issues and the same issues that were important then. So people are in some ways looking at the long term, because these are big, 5 really important issues for Singapore. The other, the pandemic doesn't seem to have made a dent, and it also shows that the blind spot, the environment, the climate crisis of October, September, August last year is still a blind spot now. So make of it what you will, but I think in some ways, we do want to talk about these issues, and we do want the opportunity to discuss, and there is a consciousness of what the big issues are. But between the pandemic, the lack of time, the lack of media, independent media, just this huge rush, we end up, in the shallow end of the pool, flailing about rather than focusing on the big picture.
8 days is just too short.
Yeah. But I think it also is a very good chance, this election, to say that we have a voice, right? Especially for voters who are horrified by the climate crisis, right? Who are horrified by structural inequality, who are horrified by issues of race and gender and sexuality, discrimination on those fronts. These are not going to be brought up until they know that we have a voice, that we have a vote that can assert that can do significant damage, right? That is a significant share of the electorate. To me, that's what is important. So, in my area, I don't have good choices. I mean, I'm just going to put it out there, right? I don't have good choices, right? I don't have the opposition party that I would love to have, and of course, the ruling party is also feeling somebody who I dislike. But I really cannot vote anything other than opposition in clear conscience due to that fact. The climate crisis is looming. Discrimination of people of different identities is in my face, right? How can I even bring up these things? How can I show that I have a voice? How can these things be heard if there is no strong opposition presence? How can that be heard at all if there is no check and balances, if there is no real threat to the power and the supremacy of the incumbent? So I think this will be a very important deciding moment. It could really seem like it's a small election, or they just had to do it, get it out of the way. But no, the stars have aligned. Things have really come together in such a way that this is going to be a precedent. It's going to be something that will allow us to say, we want to talk about these issues. We must talk about these issues. Yeah.
That's good.
I'm very riled up about it because you get hope. You get so much hope on one end. You have Jamus, you have Tambia, you have Raish, you have Tan Cheng Bock, all of the names that you mentioned. And you have all of the wonderful people as well on social media posting these amazing arguments, amazing ideas. Even Alfian Saad just today came up with a series of posts talking about Southeast Asian or Asian writers that we should look at that address structural inequality. These are amazing, amazing issues. There's so much hope, right? But at the same time, if we don't push for it with our vote, if we don't vote different, if we don't vote, with conviction this time, we don't vote for freedom and a change and a new tomorrow, how is that hope ever going to materialize? That's why I get very riled. There's a lot of hope on one end and then a lot of horror on the other end. And it's such a powerful binary. I just wish things were like simpler, but they're not. And the vote really means a lot. It counts so much this election. I cannot emphasize that more. How am I going to grow up in a world with climate change going, oh my God. Yes, I'm very stressed about it.
Yeah. One thing about this, what do you call it, social distancing thing, that people are now forced to change their habits. Like, you don't rely on hard copy anymore. You got to go to the internet. So I don't know whether this means that people would be more, attuned to what's going on on the internet, and maybe, hopefully, independent ideas have a better chance to, reach audience than before. So this could be one possible side effect of the new situation that we're in.
In some ways, yeah, definitely. The fact that we have had these constituency broadcasts for the first time, I have seen, this is the first election that I have seen every single candidate speak. Well, not the ones that are on right now, unfortunately. I don't know why they changed the schedule. The constituency broadcast was supposed to end last night, but now they've had tonight as well. But in previous elections, I would hear, you have to go out and go to a few rallies, and then you just have these big, long speeches, which is great. But now I've heard so many, I've literally heard every candidate for every constituency for the first 5 days of the broadcast, and I've learned so much about them individually, just watching them speak. And I think one good thing would be that this changes the expectations, and hopefully in future elections, this means that the constituency broadcast will continue. But also the viability of all these e-rallies, streaming, the use of social media, being able to get so up close and intimate to the politicians, right? You mentioned Cheng Bock, hype beast. I mean, I had never heard the term until it was applied to Cheng Bock. And I'm very impressed that this 80-year-old man is better at social media than I am. Yeah. What do you think? I mean, your organization, Wake Up Singapore, is very good at social media. Are there any politicians that have really stood up to you in how they've used social media, or parties? The Workers' Party got praised for their very slick video. Does this signal a change in how we consume, how we interact with politicians in Singapore from the former very formal way, with at a distance, up on a stage, through intermediaries, to a very intimate, direct way?
I think the one thing that stood out to me was Pretty Please and Subas and some of some of the individuals on Instagram and Twitter who were meeting with these opposition candidates in real life, or if not speaking to them in some way, shape or form, or responding to them, retweeting them, all of that was quite amazing because it shows you this direct democracy. It shows you the way that these opposition candidates are really reaching out on the ground through social media, connecting politics to the voter, to the individual who's online, right, who has a following. To me, that's amazing. That's a sign. That was a very effective weaponization of social media.
Let's not use the word weaponization.
Yeah, not weaponizing. It's a very effective utilization of social media that, you know, really pushed for this kind of direct democracy, this kind of straight up discussion. You know, to me, that was the big thing that got it for me. Yeah.
So, who do you think did it best? I suppose dumb question, but simplistic question, but
I'm going to have to go with the Workers' Party, but with a shout out to as well the Singapore Democratic Party, as well as, of course, my favorite hype beast, Dr. Thum Pingtjin. Yeah, so it was all quite wonderful. I mean, some of the other opposition parties haven't sort of jumped on that bandwagon yet. I hugely advise that, I hugely advocate for that, because there are so many ideas. Everybody wants to get out their ideas. A lot of people are concerned about our future. A lot of people are using social media as a space for discussion and discourse and bouncing of ideas. It's so robust. You know, in the past you could only maybe meet up with your friends and discuss these things, and now you're connected to the whole of Singapore. This is where the very best ideas are going to thrive. And if you can tap into that, if the opposition parties can tap into that, that's an amazing resource. Yeah.
I've been very impressed with, well, I mean, so New Narrative has held online watch parties, Zoom meetings with guest speakers and discussions, and the sheer number of people who come into the chat and say, we're first-time voters and we want to learn more, and asking questions of each other and the constructive debate. And I always have to tap out of these chats early, but they've been able to, you know, what I hear then the next day is, oh, last night we stayed in the chat until 1 a.m., you know, until midnight, talking politics, learning from each other, talking about these issues. So when you talk about connecting, right, we're connecting to politicians, but technology also has helped us connect with each other and create safe spaces for talking about very controversial issues. And I'm really excited to see people also who might not have felt safe going out and talking politics in public or public fora, coming to our meetings and being able to participate fully and having very robust conversations about the issues, and also understanding the, you know, all these difficult issues that Singapore faces. So I'm, you know, and a lot of this is simply like, I can organize this, but if no one shows up, right, and no one puts in effort and no one participates, then it's for nothing. But people are coming forward. So how we connect with each other politically, I think is also changing. Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
It really puts a new spin on the phrase, the personal is the political. Now it's, you know, your personal brand, the things that you share on a day-to-day basis that are going to make politics fun, fashionable, interesting and engaging, right? I think that's the kind of stuff that social media is allowing us to do. There are folks over at the Bras Basah Open School of Theory who do amazing discussions using event spaces, using event pages on Facebook to connect these individuals, to bounce these robust ideas together. That's a way that we could make it fun and engaging and insightful and interesting. Yeah, so there's so much wealth of content, there's so much wealth of ideas that are just not being tapped right now. And that again comes back to, this is why this election is so important. The Workers' Party and some of the other opposition parties as well are tapping into that wealth of ideas.
I think that, you know, the politicization of the electorate is very important for people to, you know, feel invested in the issues of the day, and especially I'm very heartened that you say that young people are interested in conversations, and that, you know, let's hope that these conversations continue. and that iron sharpen iron, right? So how we can talk about because of like the future belongs to them, right? So yeah, I think that once upon a time people will say, oh, everybody is so apathetic, whatever, right? So I maybe we don't want to hear that. Once people are very like interested in what's going on, and politics isn't going to be a dirty word anymore, Yeah.
So Terry has thrown up a chart behind me, a table. This is CrowdTangle's measure of Facebook page over the political parties' Facebook pages over the past week. So it's just the past 7 days. And there's some really interesting numbers up there. Because if you look at the Workers' Party, they're number one with 190,000 total interactions, which you'd expect. But amazingly, number two is the People's Voice Party with 105. Then number three, People's Action Party, 89,000, SDP 87, and those are, and then there's Progress Singapore Party at 61, and then the rest are actually very, very small. So there's a clear gap between the number one and then the number two, and then number three and four are clustered together, and to a lesser extent, number five. And what we're also seeing very interestingly is a very high interaction rate with the People's Voice, even though they don't have the highest number of average posts and not necessarily the highest views, and definitely nowhere near the highest page likes, but they have a very high interaction rate and they've got a very strong rate of growth. I don't know if this tells us anything. I mean, Sean, this is more your area than mine. I have no idea what to make of a lot of these numbers. But I have to say I'm very surprised to see the People's Voice Party so effective. I guess a lot of these are Lim Tian's personal videos, right? He has been surprisingly a very effective politician. And if you look at his party's logo, I mean, as depicted there, it's him rather than the party logo itself. But these are some very interesting numbers. And can you put this in the context? Like, do you know how many your website, how many interactions your website gets in a week? Do you have any idea of some of these numbers, or how many likes there are on your page?
Well, I mean. Our page likes, at least on Instagram, right, hovering about 50,000. Right. On Facebook, it's much higher. But actually, the number that I think is more interesting to bring up is the interaction rate for the People's Action Party. It's abysmal. It's 0.4%. So it may as well be, the sister party of the Reform Party if you had no other numbers to go on. Why that's a very interesting number in my analysis is that it doesn't look like people are interacting with it very much. So I'm guessing, really, there may be a lot of moderate voters who are on that page, who have liked the page, who are kind of interested in what's going on there, but not necessarily engaging with the content, not necessarily very passionate about the ideas or the messages which are coming out of there, which is really something that we're trying to work on, right? We're trying to work on swinging those moderates there, right? So I think that's a nice view of the landscape of social media. It's, people can have robust political discussions, right? But I think that there's also a big group of individuals who are just kind of apathetic, right? They're not super passionate about anything, the moderates, the centrists, and that number is a reflection of that, I think. And so if I'm speaking to any of you, if we are speaking to any of you, get out of the moderate position. You can't wait any longer. I mean, even if you're a moderate and you only care about bread and butter issues, that's fine, right? Just look at how much better things were after GE2011, right? Increased the top tax bracket, Pioneer Generation package, CHAS was expanded, white paper reversed, Singapore Conversation was started. When they have real competition, right, they're going to be better, they're going to perform better. But when there's no competition, water tax goes up, Halimah Yacob gets somehow slaughtered into the presidency, POFMA gets put on the table. Pretty Please and Watain get censored, the ban hammer. Even if you're a moderate, I can't imagine that there's a good reason to not say, hey, let's give them a little bit of a challenge, right? It's worked out in the past. This is an election where you know there is absolutely no way on earth that the PAP loses power. So even if you're a moderate, you don't care about social issues, right? There's still, please do vote opposition. There's really no good reason that I can think of. Even on the bread and butter front, it's just a good choice. It's just a good, sensible, logical decision. Yeah.
I was saying that, because from my own personal electoral experience, right? I think that, there was a time where there were walkovers, right? People couldn't even vote, right? And the PAP has been in power for, a long time. So many people have been voting PAP, and they're just going to vote PAP all the while, right? And also voting being compulsory, the default vote would be PAP. And so when you now come and say, why don't you consider an alternative party? And then people would be like, do I really have to think? It's so hard, because why can't I just vote PAP and just be done with it? So I think that there is this to convince people to vote alternative, it's the status quo would be to vote the PAP. Yeah. And the other thing I want to say is about, I've always felt, in my own opinion, from the 2011 and 2015 elections, that there were a lot of people who were not, taking their information from the internet. Even people who are well educated may not be interested to actually go to the internet to find things, So even though, let's say we can just put our manifesto online or whatever, we still had to mail a hard copy. We just felt that there was this gap. And it's not a matter of being well or not well educated. It's just a habit that I found that in 2015 people just didn't really. They just used the internet for maybe emails, emails, right? And there's still a lot of businesses that block like Facebook or social media from the office internet, so they can only look at internet during lunchtime or or during the evening time, and if they're too tired, they just go home and they don't look at the internet at all. So what I'm saying is that because of this COVID thing, right, where everybody had to work from home and everything, right? So I don't know whether this pattern has changed, and whether people are now sort of relying more on taking their information from the internet than before, and whether this will translate to more sort of consideration, you can think about it more about whether you want to vote alternative. Yeah, so that's why I'm just my take.
Thanks, Jeanette. Terry has thrown up another interesting image which actually quite startles me, because it shows Chee Soon-Juan as the politician with by far the most not just interactions. He's above the Prime Minister and the Speaker and Lim Tian, but if you look at the views on his videos, far and away the most views on his videos, right? And even though his page likes 93,000, it's a fraction of the almost 1.5 million that Lee Hsien Loong has. Lee Hsien Loong doesn't seem to have any videos, but the interaction rate, the average post, the view, Chee Soon-Juan, has his use of social media stood out at all to you? Have you noticed any sort of a lot of interaction with Soon-Juan's? Because I'm also not seeing Cheng Bok. Cheng Bok is there at number 7. But again, maybe the surge has been in the last few days, but he's at 46K with interactions and a lower interaction rate. Yeah. So what's your feeling, Sean?
So it's an odd thing here, I feel, to some extent, to have Chee Soon-Juan as the top spot. It's great, but it also means that the rest of the party isn't getting that share of the attention, right? So these are amazing results, right? But I'm a little bit concerned because I want the SDP to keep going, right? When Chee Soon-Juan eventually has to step down, I want people like Tambia and the new crowd to come up and be able to inherit a powerful and strong party. Here what we're looking at is Chee Soon-Juan kind of getting the big share of the views, of the engagement, right? Another interesting number actually to point out is how Lee Hsien Loong as well has really awful interaction rate numbers. So he's at 0.5 now. So again, these are terrible results. So once again, there are probably a good number of people who have liked the page but who are not engaging with the ideas. They're not really crazy about or very passionate about it, right? And that's a little bit startling coming from effectively the man who is running this country, right? You would sort of expect that his political views are the scariest, are not the scariest, but the most like, they're the most either upsetting or delightful, or, you know, they evoke some kind of emotion that you feel something about them, right? But there's none of that. And I do have a very sad suspicion that that may be because people do just see Lee Hsien Loong as almost kind of like representative of the government, you know, representative of civil service and the things that it's pushing out. Not a politician in his own right, but rather a representation of the state apparatus, of the country as a whole. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so Terry has signaled we're almost out of time. So let's do we have any questions, Terry? Okay, well, we'll see if we can have any questions. If any of you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat. We'll add them to that. But let's just quickly, the last question I had before the big wrap-up question, biggest disappointment of the past 8 days. Well, we've talked I think we were kind of covered some of that. We're disappointed of a lot of things, but is there anything particularly or any politician that you expected more out of in the past 8 days, or that you were hopeful about, both on the PAP or the non-PAP side? Anything stood out to you there?
I think I wanted to say that I'm heartened that I think that there have more people young people are more the interest shown by young people. And you know, we always say that there is a base of people who always support opposition, right? Or alternative parties. But then what we want to see is an increment of that, you know, so that there's more balance, right? So how many people are now like coming in and new viewers, if you like, or new people who are now following when they didn't follow before? I think that's, to me, the gift of this GE.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any biggest points?
I think the biggest.
Say no,
I mean, I think for me, one of the big things that was sort of floating around, one of the ideas that was floating around was just about how, you know, sort of justifying certain individuals, right? So Tan Wu Meng, when he came up with the Alfian Sa'at saga, people were just saying, oh, it's Tan Wu Meng, right? Or Ivan Lim. They're just like, oh, it's just one guy, right? He's just bad. He's just a bad guy, right? So I think there is a kind of tendency that we all have, right, to kind of isolate these politicians, right, or Vivian, and say, oh, he's just an aggressive, he's just an angry guy, right? But it's not isolated. There's only really one party that can say treason, that can say that you're an enemy of the people, that you're not a loving critic, and have it be so forceful, really.
And can say outright falsehoods and not be called out on them by the media, let alone Poffman. Yeah,
these are not isolated individuals at all, right? Ivan Lim as well, military man. I think there is a good reason for why his rap sheet is like that. I think there's a good reason as well why someone with that rap sheet was allowed to skyrocket up into the political realm. So I just want to sort of, if there was one thing that I wanted to say that I've noticed, it's don't indulge this idea that they are separate individuals and that the whole of it is okay. No, it's a product of the whole. This is a structural, systemic issue. I keep saying those words over and over again. But it's It's been proven over and over again. These things are going to keep happening, they're going to keep coming up, and we're going to keep pretending like we're surprised, or how is this guy in there? I wish I just had Tharman and everybody else, I don't care about them. No, you got to take the good with the bad. And ultimately, from a macro perspective, the machinery is not doing us well. It's not focusing on the issues that we need to focus on, not on our national conscience, climate change, LGBT issues, structural inequality, discrimination, the list goes on and on. It's completely gone. I don't see any good reason that this machinery should be allowed to continue.
And you mentioned Tharman, and I'd say he's my biggest disappointment because he's the one person who could really change a lot of this. Standing up, speaking out, right? He has so much stature, so much respect, and he remains silent. Like, there's a comment right in the chat right now. He keeps quiet. Why does he keep quiet? Call out racism, call out inequality, call out elitism. He is in a position to actually and just make his own party better, right? So we're not asking him to praise the opposition or help them. Just make your own party better and call things out when they are wrong. When they're unreasonable, when someone's saying something stupid. Don't let them hide people like Tan Wu Meng behind you, or Ivan Lim, both of whom, Ivan Lim was supposed to be in Jurong GRC, supposed to be under his wings or whatever. He's completely silent on race, even though he himself is a minority and is active victim of discrimination. If there's one person in Singapore who can actively say, I am being clearly discriminated against by the PAP leadership, right? It's Tharman, right? And he's very politely say, I don't want to be PM or whatever, but that's not the point. Even if you don't want to be PM, you are being discriminated against. And I am tired of this narrative, to be honest, that he's a good guy, because he's not. He's an enabler. He's complicit, right? We all want Uncle Tharman. Instead, we're getting Uncle Tom. And that is the sad state of it. That is the sad state of it. I have lost little respect. Even the economic lecture he gave last night, it's full of economic straw men, right? He's saying the politicians want, the opposition are proposing this. No, he puts up this very utopian thing about universal healthcare or whatever. Well, we can't have that. Well, the opposition weren't proposing that. They were saying the current system you're doing is not working, and you actually need to improve the current system. You need to actually deliver on the things you're already promising. But again, right, he speaks from his position of authority and respectability, and puts up straw man arguments and logical fallacies, and it's just disappointing. All right, let's take some quick questions, and I think the first one is for you, Sean, because you've specifically talked about this, from Samantha, who says, what would you say to those of us who want to vote opposition for a balanced and healthy government, but feel the opposition candidates in our constituency aren't great, or if we disagree with some of their often xenophobic views?
I fully empathize with you, Samantha. In fact, I wanted to ask if you're from Jalan Besar, because I'm feeling the same thing. It's a horrible feeling, really, especially as a minority, and then having to make this really awful choice. But again, I had a discussion with some of my friends, and looking at the interesting ideas that's popping up on Twitter and Instagram. And I was made to realize one thing, right? We could have, we have to work on one before the other becomes something that we can work on, right? So if we try and fix the opposition now, we say no vote for you until you clean up your act, right? By that time, the powers that be are going to have extended POFMA. They are going to have created a culture of police reports flying around. And then it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter even if we had a wonderful opposition, right? Our ideas would be in the shadows. The opposition would be so crippled by just having no success that they would not be able to improve, right? To take to take into account a broader set of views, a broader set of ideas. So one really has to come before the other. And as horrifying as it is for me to put my vote in on Friday, I will do it. I will do it. I will resoundingly do it. Yes, I can see there's really no other choice here. Yeah, one simply must come before the other. Yeah, either a serious challenge to the hegemony and the history and the power that has become so encrusted, that has so encased the BAP. Either that or that the machinery is voted out altogether. Either one of those two must come first before we can even talk about xenophobia, about discrimination, about sexual orientation. Those have to unfortunately wait. Yeah.
I would add, Samantha, that first, to actually try and go in depth into some of those views, and there is a lot more complexity and nuance to some of those views that I found sitting opposite many of these candidates, as I have over the past 8 days. Some of them, they are what they are, but others, there's more nuance. Also, Jalan Besar, Leong Tze Hien, I really enjoyed talking to him, right? That guy just loves his numbers. So it's more than just one candidate, there's a few. But the most important point I want to make is actually, we have to hold the PAP and the opposition to the same standard, because the PAP, their candidates, they have also said racist things. They have also said horribly discriminatory things, right? And why do we not hold them to account, whereas why do we expect the opposition to be better, to be perfect, when we are willing to let the PAP and their candidates, especially in the GRCs, get a pass? We don't scrutinize the PAP candidates the way we scrutinize the opposition candidates. And I've had messages on WhatsApp saying, how come you're not asking the opposition candidate this or that or whatever? Why aren't you being harder on them? And I'm like, well, no one's asking the PAP candidates those questions, for one, right? No one's holding the PAP candidates to account. PAP candidates aren't even willing to come on this show. So are you being fair, first of all, to the broader context in which we're getting all this information? I have had to also ask myself, do I think about, when I think someone's xenophobic, have I actually listened to what they said? Or am I just listening to what other people say, oh, this person's xenophobic, or the mainstream media, this person's xenophobic? Have I actually listened to what they say? So my advice is, first of all, investigate the candidates thoroughly and listen to what they have to say, make up your own mind, but also hold candidates of all sides to the same standard and be fair, right? And if at the end of the day, whatever you make your decision, that's fine, but please be fair. Brema asks, would like to hear thoughts if social media has replaced the rallies. And Dill asks, how do you think the online sphere has changed since the last elections? What did social media look like in 2015? I think we've spoken a bit about this, but do you guys have any additional thoughts?
I guess I'll do a quick, just a very quick answer, because we've talked extensively about it. Yeah. So yes, I think in this particular case, yes, it is obvious that social media has replaced the rallies, really just because of the COVID-19 situation. Would I like to see social media replace the rallies? I'm not quite sure that that's the case. I remember working on the last election, going there, taking photos and things like that. And I think that there is a spirit, there is this very intangible force that comes into you, that makes you suddenly just feel like I am a part of this process, right? These are my fellow flesh and blood citizens, brothers and sisters, and we're all fighting for the same cause. That feeling is a little bit lost in social media, right? Going there, waving them. Yes, we can be cynical and say it's theatrics, but there is a power to that. That feeling, don't discount it, right? I would like to see that rallies come back, after the COVID thing has blown over. But that feeling of we're one country, that's beautiful. And I miss that, genuinely.
Yeah, I would say that's the only time we have the freedom to assemble.
You've been up there speaking. Yeah. How does it feel as a speaker with a big crowd in front of you, saying things and hearing that roar?
Of course, when you connect with physical connection and physically being together, it's a very, very different feeling. And that's something we really miss for this election. And sometimes I think that, all these laws against the freedom to assemble is because things change, and magic happens when people get together, and rather than being in silos. And so the way to control people is to make everybody, remain in their silos, right? So I think that I really hope that we can get together in a crowd, in a nice physical rally one of these days. Yeah, maybe the next GE. Yeah.
I think it shouldn't be a choice, it should be a trade-off, right? Constitutionally, we get 9 to 56 days of campaigning. There's no reason why we need to stick to 9. We've never had more than 10 since, I think, 72. But any government could say we're going to have 56 days of campaigning, and then we could have e-rallies, live rallies, broadcasts, meet and greets, walkabouts, plenty of time for all of those things if you just give 56 days. Other countries in the region have like 6-month elections, right? Because maybe they're bigger countries, but they give people time to really reflect on the important issues and to allow them to do their research and actually, it doesn't feel so pressurized. So it's not even a trade-off that we have to make, Okay, so I guess last question, we're I think really out of time, is predictions, and how do panelists predict the results on polling day? Any surprises expected? So
93 seats are up for grabs. So if the Workers' Party holds the line, then it means that the existing 6 opposition seats will remain, right? So that's 6 out of 93, which is really, really very, very thin. I mean, very, very small number of opposition in a House of 93. So really, the electorate, I hope they realize how important it is to have a more balanced, slate of politicians, and to have, more debate. Otherwise, we're just relying on just 6 opposition members to hold the government accountable. Of course, the 6 is actually 2 constituencies. So it's not like 6 people, right? It can be 5. No, it could be. It's actually 5 plus 1. So if if the Workers' Party have already said that don't rule out the fact that all the electoral gains of the past 2 GEs could be wiped out this time, and I would really hate to see that happen. And if that happens, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a dark day in Singapore if that happens.
Yeah, our unit was won by less than 1% last time.
Yeah,
right?
it was, and we don't take things for granted, right? But what I'm saying, if our unit is lost, you lose 5 in one go, and you're just left with 1, and assuming that Hougang still remains, and that's just 2 constituencies out of so many, and 6 out of 93 or 1 out of 93. I think that's an awful thought in my mind. So I really hope that the electorate would consider this very carefully, how important it is. I don't really want to see us going back to square one.
I think one important thing to add to that as well, right, is that in GE2015, social media was in a way won by the opposition parties, right? So many people with alternative voices swarmed social media, and it really looked like there was going to be a strong resurgence of opposition voices. And of course, in reality, it was a whitewash. So what I'm getting at here is that right now, things may look hopeful. Twitter, I Stand With Rayesh is trending, right? On Instagram, things are going viral. I would say, do be cautious, because the same thing has happened before. We win social media, we win that domain, we win the online domain, and we get whitewashed in the election thoroughly. So I can really see that happening again. It is a dark prediction, but it feels all too familiar to me. I can remember clearly 5 years ago the amount of hope I had, and then seeing the numbers on the screen and then just freaking out. Just, how is this possible, right? So we've seen it once. I hope we don't see it again. Yeah. The real surprise will come much later, when we see how far we've dropped, or how quickly things have changed. That will be the real surprise, because I'm going to hold to it that this is a very, very, very important, almost landmark election in my books. This is the election where it was a social media election. It's unprecedented, where the new voters are coming up, where new issues are being raised, where the idea of a national conscience and our history and our structure and our systems of power are being placed on the table. This is a landmark election. The real surprise to me will come 2 to 3 years, when we see either how quickly down we've fallen or how quickly things have changed. Yeah.
Thanks, John.
The 2015, after that GE, a lot of laws were enacted, you know, that constrain, you know, the space for us to converse. What's going to happen if next, you know, the ruling party goes back to power, and then I was quite unhappy to see so many laws being passed after the last GE. Laws which I shan't say anymore.
I mean, if you look at all the laws that we've campaigned against, right? The Protection of Justice Administration Act, POFMA, you know, the amendments to the Public Order Act and things like that. I personally, I suspect if the PAP gets a very strong result, in the next 5 years, both the Online Citizen and New Narrative will be banned from Singapore in some way or form. Not formally banned, because they're not stupid enough to do that, but they are going to pass laws and enmesh us in regulation and make life so difficult for us that it will be impossible for Singaporeans to access the Online Citizen or New Narrative. And they've already been talking about that, remember? They're talking about all these laws about, against foreign-funded individuals, right, foreign-funded organizations, and every time they say that, they mention New Narrative, they mention Thum Pingtjin, they mention Kirsten Han. So this is a very important election that they've made their agenda clear in terms of how they want to curtail our right to information, our access to alternative non-government influence or government-controlled news sources, and a lot is going to depend on what happens in 2 days. And let's not forget, the opposition could win 5 GRCs and 5 SMCs, and they would still have fewer than a third of the seats in Parliament. Fewer,
yes, absolutely.
Right? They would win 30 seats, they need more than 30. They need, what, 32? Is it 32? Yeah. So this is not, you know, even if we get massive gains, it is not even going to be enough. We really need people to come out and vote on their conscience, on what they feel, and what the kind of country that they want. Mm-hmm. The kind of agenda that PAP has set out has been very clear over the past 5 years. Do you want more POFMA? Do you want higher costs? Do you want politicians saying racist things, bigotry, attacking ordinary citizens, shutting down your sources of information and news? That's the agenda they've set out over the past 5 years. That's their track record. They're not apologizing for that. They're doubling down on it. They've done it during the election period itself, right? The bigotry, the POFMA, all of that has happened just in the past 3, 4, 5 days. So we know who they are and what they're going to do. And well, I'm just going to say, I think on behalf of all my panelists, yes, please Singaporeans, vote wisely and think about the country that you want. So, any final words?
Quite scary, right?
It is really, really frightening, I think. Extremely hopeful on one hand, extremely frightening on the other. I mean, the chance to get this discussion with the two of you and bounce these amazing ideas has been wonderful. The amazing questions that we are getting from the individuals. This is all wonderful. This is stimulating this robust debate. I've learned so much. I think we've all learned a great amount. So please, I think, keep that up, right? Your likes, comments, your discussions, tweets, retweets, Insta stories, all of that works. It's amazing, right? It gets people interested. Yeah. Don't give up hope. Don't think that, I'm going to lose friends over this or whatever. Please, I'm really, really concerned. I mean, I want a nice world to live in. I'm sure we all want the best for our country. We want freedom. We want a new vision for this country, right? So every little thing, the comments, the retweets, everything, keep at it, right? We see it, it's wonderful, yeah.
2 sentences from me. Okay. Support independent media and make your vote count.
Thanks very much, Jeannette. Yeah. So vote wisely, everyone. So nothing from us tomorrow. It's cooling off day, and again, that's another ridiculous law that prevents independent media operating. But well, good luck, everyone. And oh yes, don't forget, please volunteer as polling agents and counting agents. Doesn't matter which political party, volunteer for anyone. They all. I'm sure the PAP has enough, but you know, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is you volunteer, take part in our election, be a citizen volunteer. I know the opposition parties, many of them are very short of volunteers. Those of you who are worried about the secrecy of the ballot, it's polling agents and counting agents who help ensure the integrity of our votes. So if you want to do something about it, go and volunteer, please. I mean, it's a public holiday anyway on Friday, you know, and you only need just maybe an hour to vote, right? The rest of the time, go volunteer and be a part of the country, you know, the process that makes our country, and it allows us to be a part of the process that allows us to express our opinion and make our voices heard and helps us fight for the country that we want it to be. So it doesn't matter what your political views are, please volunteer. So from Jeannette, from Sean, from myself, thank you very much. Thank you very much for tuning in to The Online Citizen over the past 8 days. Please do support The Online Citizen, support Terry, support TOC, subscribe to them. Also, if you can, please do subscribe to New Narrative. And if you want to check out all our coverage, newnarrative.com/SG-elections. It's all there. Also, we have a book out. You can buy that. But please do join us as a member if you can. So thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you, all of you. Take care.